Long ago, in a distant village, a man named Nathan lived in a modest cottage with his wife Emily. Nathan worked as a pottery vendor, but he often complained about the lack of demand for his goods and the meager income he earned. Every evening, he returned home with a loaf of bread, a handful of dates, and a few olives. This was the only meal he and Emily shared since they got married. Emily had inherited the cottage from her parents after their passing, as she was their only daughter. She was a wise, patient woman, grateful and content despite their poverty. She always thanked God and prayed that her husband's work would prosper. Months passed, but nothing changed. Each night, as they sat down to eat, Nathan would lean against the wall, let out a deep sigh, and say, "If only God would bless us, so I could finally fill it." Emily would listen, puzzled. What was it he wanted to fill? They could barely afford daily meals. After hearing this repeatedly, Emily began to suspect that Nathan was simply hungrier than she was, so she began sharing her portion with him, believing he needed it more. What she didn't know was that Nathan, despite acting poor, wasn't denying himself anything. Every day he visited the market and treated himself to grilled meats and fine foods, returning home with just enough to maintain the illusion of hardship. Meanwhile, Emily never tasted any of that and kept declining help from neighbors, always defending her husband, saying he bought her everything she needed and hid it under his cloak. The neighbors, however, saw through the act. They never smelled food from her home or saw her wear anything new. It made them sad. She was still young and didn't deserve such a life. Then, one day, Nathan fell ill. His condition worsened, and eventually he passed away. Emily wept bitterly. "I used to give him half my bread and survive on a quarter. Now, I won't even have that." She soon ran out of the few coins he left behind, and had no family to turn to. In the same neighborhood, there was a man named Chris. He was a construction worker, but often jobless and homeless, sleeping in alleyways or on the kindness of strangers. When he heard about the widow, he thought, "Maybe if I marry her I could finally have a roof over my head. I'll care for her and provide what I can." Chris approached the village preacher and asked him to propose on his behalf. The preacher told Emily that Chris was a kind man, though poor. Emily hesitated. Life with him might be even harder than before, but her logic prevailed. Poverty wasn't shameful, and having a respectful, supportive man was more important than wealth. She agreed. The villagers, touched by the news, came together to help. One gifted Chris a coat and shoes. Another took him to the bathhouse and paid his fee. The local barber trimmed his hair and beard and applied cologne. Emily wore an old dress of her mother's, and her neighbors helped her get ready for her wedding night, though she couldn't hide her nerves. She had heard Chris was rough around the edges. But when Chris arrived, Emily was stunned. He was polite, well-mannered, and handsome. He greeted her kindly and even brought a small gift. Emily thought, "I nearly refused him because of his poverty. Thank God I didn't let worldly logic blind me." Chris, on the other hand, couldn't believe how beautiful Emily was. Before meeting her, his only concern was finding shelter. Now he silently thanked God for his mercy. The neighbors wished them well and left. 2 days into their marriage, Chris woke up early to search for work. He wandered the village until a wealthy merchant offered him a job repairing his garden wall. Chris didn't hesitate. He worked hard, but his mind kept drifting to Emily, who had no food at home. When he finished, The merchant was impressed and paid him generously, asking him to return the next day to paint the house. With joy, Chris went to the market, bought meat, vegetables, spices, and oil, and returned home. Emily was thrilled. She borrowed firewood from a neighbor and began cooking. For the first time in years, she lit a cooking fire and smelled food inside her home. They ate joyfully, and Chris smiled. "We have nothing to sip tonight, but tomorrow I'll bring tea, sugar, maybe some almonds. For now I'm tired and need rest. There's more work tomorrow." From that day on, Chris returned home daily with food and supplies. One evening, he gifted Emily a piece of cloth and asked her to sew herself a new dress. Later, he brought her shoes. Over time, her life improved, and she began to love Chris deeply, calling him Mr. Chris out of respect and gratitude. One night, their arrogant neighbor Mark overheard this and sneered. "Did you hear that? Emily, once high class, now calls that stray dog sir." But his wife replied wisely, "Isn't Chris better than the man who let her starve while hoarding wealth?" Chris's kindness revealed his true character. Emily noticed he often read books, medical books. One day she asked, and he finally opened up. His father had been an herbal doctor, and Chris had studied under him. After his parents died, his brothers sold their home and left him with nothing. He was forced to fend for himself. Emily, ever wise, saved a little from what Chris brought, preparing for tough times. Soon she had a pantry like the other women: flour, dates, oil, dried meat. Then tragedy struck. While lifting a heavy stone, a large rock crushed Chris's leg, and he was bedridden. Their money dwindled. "You'll go hungry if this continues," he told Emily, but she smiled. "Don't worry, I've stored enough." Mark, their neighbor, heard of Chris's injury but never offered help. He hoped Chris would return to the streets, but Chris bore the pain patiently. For a week, they survived on Emily's stock until it ran out. Emily said firmly, "I'll find work. I can spin wool or grind barley. God won't abandon us." Chris fell silent. Then he said, "My life has always been hard. My father trained me in herbal medicine, and I still have his tools, hidden by my uncle. If I ever had the means, I'd open a shop." As they spoke, a small mouse darted across the floor. Emily chased it with a broom, yelling, "That pesky mouse is back. We need to fix that wall." Chris checked the wall and found a loose brick. When he pulled it out, he discovered a small hole, and inside, a wooden box filled with gold coins. He filled his pockets and hid the box again, saying nothing. The next day, he went out, bought ointment, and treated his leg. He strolled through the park for the first time in weeks, then hired a porter to carry food and clothes home. When Emily opened the door, she gasped in disbelief. There before her was everything she'd ever dreamed of: food, clothes, perfumes. She was so overjoyed, she didn't question where it came from. That night, she wore a new dress. Chris smiled. "From now on, only silk for you. God has blessed us." Then he revealed the secret. He had found Nathan's hidden treasure. "Your late husband wasn't poor. He hoarded this gold while letting you go hungry. He always prayed to fill that box." Emily broke down in tears. "I starved while he hid all that? What a cruel, greedy man." Chris gently comforted her. "Don't cry over the past. God gave you justice. Now people knock on your door because they know your generosity." The next day, Chris bought a store and set up his father's herbal tools. He began making remedies, and in a few months, He made enough money to return to Emily all the gold she had entrusted him with. As for Mark, his business failed. He sold everything, even his furniture. His wife begged him to ask Chris for a loan, but Mark refused. "I'd rather starve than beg that tramp." Eventually, she left with their son. Mark lost his house too, and in a twist of fate, Chris was the one who bought it. And so, the one they once called a vagrant became Mr. Chris, a respected man, a healer, a provider, and a symbol of how integrity, kindness, and faith can transform a life.
مكان فيه 3 معزات وفيه ديب. 3 معزات كانوا ياكلوا بالمرعى. جاب ديب ياكل واحدة منهم، معرفش ليه، عشان كانوا 3. راح جاب الليل، خبط على المعزة البيضة، قال طق طق طق، قالت من على الباب، قال أنا أختك المعزة السود. راح فتحت له الباب، راح قالها راح خبط على باب المعزة السوداء، قالت له مين على الباب؟ راح قال لها أنا أختك العنزة البيضة. هو كذاب وهو الديب. راحت فتحت له الباب، راح قال لها توتة توتة، خلصت الحدودة.